Hey North Shore Church, a couple weeks ago we invited you to nominate your workplace for a free breakfast and we got such a good response we decided not to just draw one, but three. So here's a bunch of Chick-fil-A. We're gonna bring it into Arrowhead Elementary and bless these guys with breakfast this morning. Let's head in. So we are heading to the Evergreen Cardiovascular Imaging Center. Is that right? Yep, that's a long name. But we're gonna bring them breakfast anyway. Let's go. Do you love traffic as much as I do? Hey, next stop is ProStar Insurance in Bothell. Let's go! So this is a lot of food. Oh my goodness. Here's a tray. Oh no. Hi guys. You too.
Well, yeah, that's very cool. Well, how would you like to see that shimmying down the hall at work? I don't know about that, but anyway, if he's bringing food, who cares? And I know a lot of you did put in for that, and obviously we would love to have done much more of that, but think about this. Such a simple act, 10 or 15 bucks worth of, chicken and biscuits or a dozen donuts or some bagels or a bag of oranges or whatever it is, what a difference that makes in just kind of lifting the spirit at wherever it is that you work. And so you can do that tomorrow. It's pretty simple. Find 10 or 15 bucks and go make it happen. And the incredible ways that we can bring joy and help everybody love Mondays, which is what we've been talking about, is sort of figuring out where that intersection between our faith and the way that we actually work, whatever that workplace may represent, which we'll say more about here in just a second. But to get started, I want to ask you a question. Incidentally, my name is Jonathan Wolfgang. I'm one of the pastors here. But I want to ask you a question. Yes, well, thank you very much. It's really my name. So anyhow, here's the question. What would happen if you didn't go to work tomorrow? And I just didn't mean you didn't show up tomorrow. What would happen if you never went back to your job at all, ever? Now, let's say you were just to instantaneously disappear or something like that, all right? Your role, your position, your workplace. Some of you say, well, I like this game. Yes, I like this. Can we do this? How do I make this happen? No, this is not a talk about needing more rest. This is more about if you weren't at work, what would change? What void would be left because you're not there? Not just what jobs wouldn't get done, or what tasks wouldn't get completed, or what projects might be delayed. I'm talking about issues that transcend to-do lists and task lists. What is it about your work that really matters? I mean, what is it about your work where you throw upwards of a third of your life at this thing that will matter in 10 years from now, or 100 years from now, or even 1,000 years from now? I talk with a lot of people about these kinds of questions, and sometimes in their honest moments, they will say, I'm not sure what I do really matters. If there's any greater purpose behind it. They'll say things like, I sit at a keyboard 70 hours a week. And I write code, or I enter data, or I answer phones. And sometimes when I'm sitting in traffic on a Friday afternoon, heading home for the weekend, I wonder if I'm really doing something that matters with my one and only life. Or I'm a student, and every day I go to class after class, I write paper after paper, I take test after test, and maybe someday I'll get to be part of something that really makes a difference. But as for now, I'm just a student. I don't really have a chance to make an impact. Or I'm a stay-at-home parent. Every day I wipe noses and do laundry and prepare meals, and it seems like nobody ever notices. What difference does that even really make? Or they'll say, Wolfgang, I'm in advertising. I spend 70 hours a week trying to get people to shop at Amazon instead of Walmart, or to buy Boeing instead of Airbus. But I'm wondering, what am I doing with my life that will outlast me? These are big questions, so big that a lot of people are even a little afraid to ask them. But if you've ever asked questions like that, you are in the right place today. Because people look lots of places for that purpose. I don't know if you found one, but let me just be very direct. For those in this room who are followers of Jesus, your purpose is crystal clear. And I want to talk very directly, especially to those of us who are followers of Jesus, about when it comes to following Jesus, what is that purpose? Why are we there? Am I marking time, or am I marking lives? Am I making a true difference where I work? Whether you're a student or a retiree, hourly worker, business owner, professional, stay-at-home parent, whatever it is. You see, each of us, I believe, has a choice. We can mark time, or we can mark lives. We can view our jobs as mundane, or we can view them with a mission. You can work and do something that will not matter 5 years from now. Or you can approach that exact same job with a different mindset and see results that matter literally forever. So how do you do that? Well, it all begins with the lenses through which we see our work, the mindset that we take into our workplaces. It begins when you approach your work with the mindset of a missionary. Now, I know that missionary word's one that has a lot of connotations. People picture folks knocking on doors. They picture conquistadors, destroying native populations and so forth. For the purposes of our conversation, a missionary is someone who's operating with a mission, someone with a message to deliver, to bring. And as followers of Jesus, we have a message to bring. It is this simple message that Jesus changes everything for anyone. There is a God who knows you. There is a God who loves you more deeply and more unconditionally than you could ever imagine. And through Jesus, He has made it possible for ordinary people like you and me to live an entirely new kind of life. A life free from the insecurity that plagues so many people. Why? Because I know I'm loved as I am. A life free from the guilt and shame that so many carry through life. Why? Because I know I'm forgiven. I don't have to pretend I'm perfect. A life free from fear and worry about the future. Why? Because I know God is for me. He knows me. I can face the future with hope. This is the message that we have, and the mission is to bring that message to as many people as we possibly can. You know, sometimes people will say, Wolfgang, it must be great working at a church. I wish I could just quit work and serve God full-time like that. And what I want to try to help them see is that you don't have to quit your job to serve God full-time. You can serve Him full-time right where you are, no matter what your role is, no matter what your job is. You know, 2,000 years ago, Jesus said some very life-changing words to a group of commercial fishermen one day. He said, "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people," he says. He says, up to this point in your life, you've been fishermen. There's nothing wrong with the fishing business. Who doesn't enjoy a good fish? But I want you to think of yourself as fishers of women and men. I want you to think of yourselves as missionaries to people. Now, does this mean that Jesus had in mind that all of His followers through the rest of history would have to abandon their careers and become professional pastors or church workers or something like that? Absolutely not. Jesus wants you to look around wherever it is that you work and say, I am surrounded by the greatest opportunity of my life, the greatest challenge, the truest treasure in the eyes of God, this mission field. It's these people. I have the opportunity to love people, to serve people, to mark the lives of people who matter to God, and to point them toward faith in Him. You keep in mind, Jesus didn't even start His public ministry until He was 30 years old. And even at that, it was only 3 years after that, His public ministry. Prior to that, you know what Jesus was doing? He was a laborer. He was a construction worker. Do you think the only time He served God in His life and impacted people was just during those last 3 years of His life? Of course not. Your job is not an obstacle for full-time ministry. It's an opportunity for full-time ministry to mark lives. See, God has arranged most of our lives in such a way that a significant chunk of our days is spent shoulder to shoulder with people who are hurting, who are searching, who are confused about who God is. Who do you know right now that fits into any of those categories? All of us know somebody. At your work, or at your school, or at your neighborhood. I mean, think about them. Maybe you see them every day in the elevator. Maybe they sit next to you in class. Maybe it's another mom or dad in the playgroup that your family's a part of. Maybe it's a regular customer at your store. Maybe they work next to you or under you or they're over you. God has given you the opportunity to help people discover truths about Him that can change their lives and literally make a difference forever. Now, when lots of people think of missionaries, they picture, kind of jungle scenes and all these kinds of crazy things. You know what I think God thinks of when He thinks of missionaries? I think He thinks of a manicurist who has people in one-on-one situation all day long to talk to people for 20 and 30 minutes at a time about life, about what matters, about faith. You could be a missionary manicurist. Can you imagine? You don't have to paint little crosses on their nails to do it, right? When God thinks of a missionary, He thinks of a business owner who sees his or her employees not as a means to an end or just profit producers, but as people to be loved, to be led, to be built into, to be cared for. That's an entirely different way of leading, isn't it? When God thinks of a missionary, He thinks of the pilot or the plumber or the student or the IT person, or the heavy equipment operator, or the food server, or the sales rep, or the doctor, or the stay-at-home mom, or the engineer, all of whom are in a position to mark lives every day. Now, this mindset is so important to find because some of you work, or you study, or you even live in environments that are difficult spiritually. And it may be tempting to think, this can't be where God wants me to be. There's so much negativity. It's so toxic. The language I hear, the jokes that are told, the suggestive comments that are said, the dishonesty, the greed, the backbiting, all this stuff. I just want to be around Christians all the time. And I think when God hears us saying things like that, He says, no. You are right where I want you. I want you to be marking lives right where you are. Because you see, you are the one person that can make a difference in the lives of the people at your workplace for eternity. They may not come and hear somebody like me, but God has you right there so they can get to know you and you can get to know them. Now, I've told some of you before, I've been a pastor now for about 22 years, and I've been blessed to be part of some really exciting, amazing churches. Right out of Bible college, I joined staff at a church in Las Vegas, Nevada, which was an amazing experience. I could fill weeks with stories of lives that I saw transformed in dramatic ways. Every week, 8,000 people came and crammed into that church. Now it's well over 20,000. From there, I moved to another sin city. I moved to Cincinnati, which is just a little different from Las Vegas, as you might imagine. Cincinnati, Ohio. But we converted an old movie theater into a church building. And again, seeing lives change. We became known as a church for people who don't like church. And people who didn't feel they could fit in sort of a normal Midwestern kind of Bible Belt church began to actually discover a community and a hope that they never known before. Marriages being transformed, lives changed. It was thrilling to get to be part of. And of course, for the last 8 years now, I've had the chance to be part of the team here at North Shore. And seeing churches being started in our area, incredible need meeting happening in our immediate community and the Puget Sound, and of course, all around the world. This growing heart for people who are far from God and this desire to really understand and authentically live as followers of Jesus. I've loved being part of those ministries. They've been a blast. But my very favorite ministry of all time came just after I left that church in Cincinnati and just before I came out here to Seattle. Because for 6 months during that time, I wore one of these. Some of you recognize this because you see it every day, right? You know exactly what this is. I was a barista at Starbucks. How many have worked at Starbucks at some point in your life? Seriously, keep your hands up. I'm just curious. Yeah, good to see you guys. The green apron book. Anyway, So I hung up my, I'll just be straight with you, I was worn out, and I needed a break from church work, and so I took it. And I hung up the speaker's microphone, and I strapped on one of these. And I worked at a mall store, all right? This is a very small place. And I worked during Frappuccino week, which is as close to hell as I ever want to get in my life, all right? But I worked with some amazing people during that time, let me tell you. There was Matt, had red dreadlocks, and a hilarious guy. Played a bass in a punk band. He smoked a lot and didn't like tobacco. Let's put it that way, all right? There was another girl named Jess, and she was in and out of this abusive relationship that she would talk about as we were working. There was Laura, the hardcore yoga girl. There was Megan, who was, actually she'd grown up the daughter of a pastor, but she had grown so frustrated and disgruntled by what she saw in church world that she had decided to become a Buddhist and was exploring that faith. One moment I will never forget. One of the shift managers was a woman named Amanda. I'll call her Amanda because her name was Amanda. And anyway, she'd worked there for years. And life was pretty typical for her, just sort of the cycle of work late, then go out and party with her friends. And she would tell you that she had grown up Jehovah's Witness, which is a movement different than Christianity. And but she was not a regular participant in that, and she would sort of claim it, but didn't actually really follow it. Amanda was my favorite kind of person. What you see is what you get. My favorite kind of people. I'd rather raw and real than fake and gross any day of the week, wouldn't you? She was just what she was, and very rough around the edges, and we had a blast. But the whole shift, this one particular night, she was not herself. And it was so busy, we were just slammed, we never got a chance to talk. And we happened to be closing together. So after the store closed, we pulled the little gate down that you've seen in the mall. We were doing all the chores to clean up. And I said, hey, Amanda, you just don't seem like yourself. What's going on? And she burst into tears. You know how people sometimes tell stories and they say, like, they burst into tears and they're kind of exaggerating. I was sprayed with the tears, all right? This was so intense. I mean, she broke down. And barely understanding her through the sobs, she started to tell me what was going on. Now, I knew that she had been dating one of the guys who worked at the T-Mobile kiosk down the mall, all right? I'm not kidding. This sounds like a soap opera, but this is what malls are like, all right? You just need to know. And this was not a good relationship. They were always fighting. He was routinely cheating on her. Just a mess. But she gave him free coffee drinks, so he came around a lot. But this night in particular was something different because she was terrified because her period was late. And she was afraid that she was pregnant by this guy. And she had no idea what she was going to do. She was not in a place where she was ready to have a baby. And this guy was clearly not in a place where he was ready to be a father or a provider. And she just kept crying. And she started talking about her own fears. She started talking about how her own family had been so broken. Her parents had never been married. She barely knew her dad. Her mom was her rock. She swore she would never be that woman, though, who just kind of continued that same cycle, that same storyline. And she didn't know what to do. And she just needed someone to listen. And I asked her if I could pray for her. And she said yes. And so I did, right there on the clock. Howard Schultz paid me to pray. Can you believe that? Anyway, and it hit me in that moment. I'll never forget this moment. It was like this light bulb. I remember this so well. It hit me in that moment. There is very little chance Amanda would have ever interacted with Pastor Jonathan. Well, our paths just wouldn't have crossed. But there was something about that moment where she felt like she could open up to Barista Jonathan, right? And I was able to be there in that moment, in that space, to pray for her, to just let her know someone cared. She didn't have to be afraid. And I'd love to be able to tell you that, play the story out that she fell on her knees and accepted Jesus in that moment. She didn't. Sometimes stories end like that, like they do in the movies. Most of the time they don't. And in case you were wondering, she wasn't pregnant. She finally broke it off with that guy. Since then, she's in a much, much healthier relationship. Even though I haven't seen her in over 8 years, we're still connected online. I just had a message from her a couple months ago. Now, just say, you don't have to go to seminary or have a degree in Bible to do this. In fact, it's better if you don't, okay? We tend to leave sharing our faith to the experts, the extroverts, and those employed by the church. Marking lives isn't just reserved for professionals like me. More often, it happens through the impact of ordinary people in ordinary moments. Lots of people who will never encounter Pastor Jonathan or Pastor Scott, but plenty of people who will get to know programmer Tim or mom next door Jennifer or neighbor Mike or manager Sue or classmate Jeff. That is your mission field, and you are perfectly suited to make an impact there. And it all comes down to this mindset. Things like this start to happen when you approach your work with the mindset of a missionary. Do you view your work that way? Whatever it is. Now, if we want to actually do this, what would that look like? Well, I want to keep it really simple because most of us are tired. I just want to give you 2 things that you can hopefully remember. 2 things. Do good work and love people well. Do good work and love people well. First, do good work. Do good work. A couple of weeks ago, Scott talked about this bringing your best concept. And it's important kind of in a big macro sense, but it's extra important when it comes to this idea of marking lives. Because whether we realize it or not, if you're a follower of Jesus, the people that you work around are constantly watching you, aren't they? Unannounced to you, if they find out that you're a Christian, they will switch on their hypocrisy radar, won't they? If they are scanning your life every moment they interact with you. And you either have the chance to build a better reputation for those of us who follow Jesus, or to do harm to that process. There's really no middle ground. People are watching. Now, your coworkers, your customers, the people around you every day, they may never say anything, but when they watch you, they're thinking 3 things. First, they're thinking, I'm watching how you work. I'm watching how you work. They're watching your work ethic. They're watching the quality of your work. They're watching the energy and the attitude with which you do it. Do they cheat on assignments? Do they copy other people's work? Friends, people are watching how you work, and it has a positive or negative impact on their view of faith. Paul says this in Colossians 3:23, Scotty quoted a few weeks ago, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. It's saying, as followers of Jesus, we strive to perform our jobs with excellence, as if Jesus were our supervisor, because ultimately, we know it's him that's going to reward our faithfulness in that role. And when we do that, not only do we become valued employees, but we will be in a much better position to mark the lives of our colleagues. You think about this. Who are the people in your workplace that command the greatest respect? Isn't it the people that do the best work? Even if, people watch, they're watching. Second, they're thinking, I'm listening to what you say. I'm listening to what you say. Jesus said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. What's inside comes out. And if your language is always off color, if it's always gossipy, if there's constant criticism and complaining, people notice. Paul wrote in Colossians 3:17, again, well-known verse, whatever you do, whether in what? Word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. People they're listening to your truthfulness to customers, to your boss, to your coworkers. How honest are you? They see. They're listening to what you say. And third, they're observing who are you. People are observing your character. Who are you? Paul writes this in another of his letters, another guy named Titus. He says, in everything, set an example by doing what is good. In your teaching, show integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned. People are watching who you are, your integrity. They want to see What do you do when you make a mistake? Do you shift the blame to somebody else? Or do you accept responsibility? They want to see when somebody crosses you, do you retaliate, get them later, or do you forgive? What's your reputation? They want to see when you're in ethical crossroads, do you take the difficult but honest path, or do you take the easier but maybe a little not so honest path? You will never have the kind of impact in your workplace that you can without that sort of example. Because people watch how you work, they listen to what you say, they observe who you are to see if it lines up with this faith you claim to have. And the people you work with, they're not looking for somebody who's perfect, of course, because none of us are. They're looking for one that's honest about their struggles, but is striving to live the kind of life Jesus makes possible for us. So do good work. Do good work. But also, love people well. Love people well. See, as important as any of our work might be, there's only one thing in your workplace that's going to last forever. I mean, you may design a phenomenal building. You may build a rock-solid roadway. You may design and develop the perfect app. But the only thing in your workplace that's going to last forever is the people. And because of this, the thing God cares most about where you work are those people that you work with. Now, you can't read the New Testament without seeing God's heart for people. It's just everywhere. And it is clear that He has a disproportionate focus on reaching those who are actually farthest from Him. Yes, of course, God cares a lot about your work, but He cares even more about the people that you work with. Some of you know the famous stories that Jesus tells. All three of them crammed together in this chapter of the New Testament in Luke 15. The most famous of them is the prodigal son story. Some of you have heard of that son that runs away from his father and is welcomed back home. But there's a story at the beginning, it's shorter, but the theme is similar, that is so extreme, it's almost shocking. Listen to this. This is Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 1. It says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus." These are the people who everyone in that day saw as the worst of the worst. They wanted to hang out with Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the religious types, they muttered. Religious people muttering. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them," which is an expression of hospitality and friendship. Verse 3, then Jesus told them this parable. "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' I tell you, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent." See, God places a disproportionate weight on reaching those who are far from Him, searching for those who are far from Him, waiting for those, wanting to welcome them home. And this is kind of an unsettling parable for a lot of us because most of us are part of the 99. And we would much rather a shepherd who cares about our preferences and our desires and our wants and our comfort. After all, it's probably that sheep's fault he wandered away, right? But who does the shepherd focus on? It's the one. Don't you see? This isn't for those of us who are here. This is for those who are not here. And can't you see that part of God's plan in helping people discover that truth, that He loves and knows them, part of His plan is to put you on that team, or to put you in that class, or to put you on that street, or to put you in that office, or put you in their life. But some people say, "Oh, I don't know what to say. I don't know the answer to their questions. I got my own questions." It's okay. Because you know what I'm learning more and more in our culture, our world? People aren't looking for folks that just have answers. They're actually far more interested in finding people that will actually just listen, that actually care enough to listen. Lots of people in church are kind of debating, what's the best way to share faith in our culture? Because in case you haven't noticed, Our world's changing, right? The fastest growing religious group in America are the nuns. And by that, I don't mean women in black and white dresses, right? I mean people who say, I have no religious affiliation. That's the fastest growing religious group in America. Other things are shifting. There was a time when people's biggest issue with faith was they don't see it as relevant to their lives. But now more and more people, irrelevance isn't the question. People of faith are extreme in many people's eyes. One survey showed 60% of adults think it's extreme to try to convert someone. It's not just, I'm not sure what you're all about relates to me. It's, I'm a little afraid to be around you. Why? Because when people think of Christians, they think of people who want to take what they believe and shove it down their throats. Whether that's a fair perception or not, that is many people's perceptions. And yet so many people, what doesn't change is that so many people are looking for answers. In our digital, distracted, tribalized world, there are still deep desires to connect with other people. All around us, people, if they're wondering if there's more to life than this, if there's really something bigger they can be part of, craving things like love, joy, and peace, which are the very things that Jesus promises to bring into our lives. The biggest problem is that most of us who are followers of Jesus, though, we don't know how to listen. We don't know how to simply get to know. We don't know how to be friends, a lot of us. Because listening is such a powerful thing. And in our polarized world, where it seems like everyone is so concerned about being heard, it turns heads when someone becomes a listener. There's one author, David Augsburger, he said this: being listened to is so close to being loved that most people cannot tell the difference. I think that's true. You want to mark lives? Begin by learning to listen. Begin by being a friend. I think that's what this is all about. And many of us struggle with figuring out how to be friends with those of different worldviews, different backgrounds. That may be the single area we need to train most in. How do you be friends with people who are so different than us? How do you learn to listen? And you know what the advice is? You may want to write this down. Just don't be a jerk. Just don't be a jerk. Shut up every once in a while. And you think about my exchange with Amanda back in that break room. If my first response to her in her moment was to tell her what the Bible says about sex, to confront her about her dating habits, to rebuke her, how do you think that would have gone? Think there's any chance anyone in that place ever would talk again about things like that with me? No way. But instead, there was a chance to get to know her, to pray with her, to talk with her, to share some of the things I learned in my dating experiences. You know, there's people here who are learning to do this really well. They're learning to be friends. And they're learning to build genuine friendships with people who have all kinds of backgrounds and believe all kinds of things. And one example of that is my friend Katrina. Some of you know her. She works at a school here in our area, and she's used her role as a school nurse to be a missionary where she works, practically showing God's love to her coworkers and the kids at her school. She does very good work, and she loves people very well. And we sat down with her to hear a bit of her story. Take a look at the screen.
I feel very blessed to have the job that I do. God wired me with a heart of compassion and a heart of caring and a heart of service. And at my job, I'm able to live those things out. A picture that I have for myself often, just mentally a cross, and I'm standing behind the cross, kind of just peeking out around it because I want it to be God and not me. In Matthew 5:16, God tells us to let our light shine. We start every Monday morning. There's an optional prayer time, and it's just been a fantastic place to start off our week. And all of us that are involved in that prayer time are looking for the needs around us, and it just gives us a different mindset while we're there at school. We had a staff member that accepted the Lord from being in our prayer group. He came and he just participated. He was invited to come, and then at the children's book fair at school, he bought a children's Bible and accepted the Lord through it. I really believe that we all have opportunities at our work to look for who we can influence. I think we have to be looking for it, but I really believe it doesn't matter where we work. There's a lot of hurting people in our world, and they want to be loved, and they want to be known, and they want to be cared for, we can have an impact, but we have to be looking. Again, that Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men so that they would know God.
It really is that simple. Do good work, love people well. And because of the trust that Katrina's built over there at her school, the way she's done her job with excellence, and the way she's loved other people authentically, not in some manipulative way, doors have opened. That school, when they went through a crisis, actually reached out to North Shore and asked if we could help. They actually invited us to come over and start doing tutoring at their school to help kids that are struggling a little bit. Every week, there's a team from here at North Shore that goes and tutors, all because of the credibility and relationship, in part, that was built there by Katrina and many others on that same staff. You can do those same kinds of things in your office, in your school, in your home, in your neighborhood, even in the break room of your Starbucks. But it boils down to this: do good work, love people well. Which is exactly what Jesus did when you think about it. Not just in his years as a laborer, Jesus did good work. He knew his most important work was to love people well. Not just the people who were like him, but the people who were least like him. He reached across racial divides, moral divides, religious divides, divisions between men and women, which were even more extreme in that day. You remember the nickname that his opponents gave him? You know how they referred to him? They called him the friend of sinners, which of course they thought was an insult. But I believe Jesus wore as a badge of honor. What nicknames do people have for you? Jesus understood that was his mission. He said it himself, kind of echoing that lost sheep theme. He said, the Son of Man, which is how he sometimes refers to himself, he came to seek and to save the lost. Looking for people far from God, listening to them, being their friend, loving them well. And friends, if you claim to follow this Jesus, you are called to do the same. The greatest work, of course, that he did, the clearest expression of his loving people, was what he did on a cross. And that's what we're going to remember right now in communion. These simple little symbols remind us of the good work that Jesus did and the love that he has for people. This little bit of bread, this little bit of juice, that symbolizes his good work by laying down his life so that we could be part of this new life, by marking our lives forever. And so in just a moment, the ushers are going to come, they're going to pass trays, and you can take those symbols as they're passed. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, you can just let the trays go by and just reflect for a few moments. Is there really this God who knows and loves me like I never dreamed? What if it's true? Get some quiet moments to think about that. But for those of us who do follow Jesus, this is our chance to not only say thank you for his good work and his love in our lives, but to say, Lord, count me in. Just like you, I want to do good work. And just like you, I want to love people well. So will you teach me? Teach me, Jesus. Because I don't to just mark time with my life. I want to mark lives. Just like you did. So would you bow your head with me? Let's ask for his help with this. Oh, Lord, I believe you have deployed all of us very intentionally to be your hope, your hands, your feet, your light, in all kinds of places. And I thank you for those in this room and what they represent. The families, the neighborhoods, the workplaces, the lives that they come into contact with all the time. That by following your example of doing good work and loving people well, it could make a difference forever. And so, Lord, those of us who call ourselves followers of yours, by eating this symbol, we say thank you, but we also say, count me in. Yes, I will, Lord. Yes, I will. My life will not be about lifting my name up, lifting my career up, lifting my success up. My life will be about lifting you up and helping people see you. So help me, Lord. I thank you. In the name In the name of the life marker, Jesus Christ. Amen.